So, can I make a car games on motorcycles joke at this? Or at this time, would that be dated?
Let's go 輝くマシンライダージャーライダーキー仮面ライダー仮面ライダーライダーライダー
Much like most of the worst of Kamen Rider list, there's consistent debate on what should be on that list as it's not consistent, and Blade is ultimately hurt by a few factors to end up on it by some people's consideration. What was initially received positively by those watching, it garnered less attention over time, leading to a lot of reevaluation, both good and bad. This is the first, and not the last, example of a Kamen Rider creative team ejected and replaced. While Toshiki Inouye and Junichi Miyashita wrote 6 and 4 episodes respectively, the show was originally helmed by Shoji Imai, who I can find nothing on, until episode 22, when he was ousted and replaced with Sho Aikawa, an individual who does not have the best track record. 3 anime he's been responsible for being Angel Cop, Genocyber, and the infamous Violence Jack. If you don't know those, check out internet reviewer Bennett the Sage in his show Anime Abandon. He reviewed them, and they are all terrible. Also, Aikawa was the main writer for Decade through episode 13, aka when it actually had a story and direction, before being shoved off and it turned to suck. Aikawa's best work was the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist series, but from what I've heard, that's crap in comparison to FMA Brotherhood. And the overall, meh, Martian successor Nadesico. Bokenger, the only Sentai he's made, is another with notoriously mixed reception to it, but from what I remember, isn't outright terrible. But as far as I can find in what happened here is, beginning midway into Ryuki, ratings and sales for Kamen Rider went into decline, by slowing that with how well its gear sold, but not abating the descent. Though I think that has less to do with Faiza's quality, Toshiki Inouye's hands-ups notwithstanding, but its content. Fai's status of Darkest Rider series due to its intended mature themes, Amazon's doesn't really count, as really the only adult thing about it is how graphic it is, that for many makes it too depressing to actually finish. To the point that in my recaps of it in 2015, I got thanked for telling people how it ended as they couldn't get through it themselves, or got a new perspective on it due to my discussion of the overt depression theme. But still not good after Agito and Ryuki also netted them negativity with existing fans. So with Blade, they were already coming in with the show in an ongoing decline, with the continuation of a broken base started previously, with Blade seeing an additional viewer loss due to better competition. And has been the ongoing relation between early Heisei shows, with the franchise suffering an identity crisis thanks to Ryuki, Blade was the series meant to open Kamen Rider's horizons and find what it was in the modern era, which in hindsight ended up taking until Double went straight back to basics to really do. The show dropped viewers quickly and would struggle all year, and set a precedent that would be used catastrophically following that, which has had long-reaching consequences once again. Hell, Blade made Toei consider canceling the franchise again, just as they had after Ryuki as well, primarily because Blade sold worse than Toho's Toseishin Grand Caesar series that ran at the same time. They didn't can it, but Hibiki was originally going to be a vastly different show. On top of that, the acting of Blade is bad on a cast-wide level. If you're a newcomer, you're less likely to notice, but for someone like me, who has watched thousands of hours of subtitled content since 2002, finds such noticeable and jarring. Everyone here screws up dialogue to the point it's almost unintelligible. And yet I would still watch these guys over having to hear any line spoken by Shunsuke Nishikawa. It's so bad. The actor for Blade, Takayuki Tsubaki, created his own language with his line flubs, it reaching the point many Japanese watchers began reliant on closed captions to understand what the hell the cast was even saying, which, when it was originally subtitled in early 2004, played havoc with its translation for that exact reason. The reason being, well, back in the 2000s, we didn't have access to closed caption scripts for anything that hadn't gone to DVD yet. Today, they can be extracted from a broadcast and be up in a text file after a couple of hours for someone to translate off of, and there are now archive sites which host them. But before the 2010s, you didn't have that. The only way was to do it by ear. Listen to what was said as you watch the show, write it down to the best of your ability, and then base your translation off of that. You did not have any other means for currently broadcast stuff, and is still used by many translators. You see this with Crunchyroll, or anyone that works to transcribe audio dramas. It was also rare to get the DVDs of the series to sub off of, and many didn't have captions on those discs back then to supply a better translation. And even then, those revisiting an initial sub with the DVDs have been known to screw it up worse if they lack a quality control team, which weren't often seen until the 2010s. Before then, it was one person, if that even checked for mistakes. This is the origin of many fan subs errors seen back in the 2000s, and in fact a bit into the 2010s as well. But it was never intentional, nor anything that egregious which derailed the understanding of a series like the more revisionist translations that plague modern works. But many couldn't do better, as there was no better resource and little peer review to drive improvement. Even to this day, many translators don't patch minor errors because it's a low priority and we just have to live with it. Thus, with the issues of the Blade cast flubbing their lines regularly, it's understandable why its original translator, TV Nikon, would have a hard time of it, especially as that was only their second Kamen Rider project in their earliest days, when no one else did Tokusatsu fan subs, and there was no template for doing fan subs that was preferred by fans. And yet, they still made a coherent presentation that, while legitimately erroneous at times, has what I figure to be understandable flaws caused by not being able to get transcripts for years. This brings us to a question I get asked a lot. Why do I make use of the subtitles and fan subs I do for my reviews? Many of the groups and versions I make use of tend to be the ones derided by the respective communities. So, shouldn't I use something better than, and I am direct quoting an actual message I received here, the worst, most shitty quality I could possibly find? Well, that's the problem. There often isn't a better option, and what I use are the most accurate ones I can get. Either no one has made an alternative, an official release has taken priority so I can't use the better version, or when someone claims to make a better translation when you compare them, turns out it really isn't, but of the same quality level using slightly different phrasing, or just appears to be possessing fewer errors to the unawares, when it is actually far less faithful to the material. With groups that did this back when there weren't better resources, well, I know enough Japanese to know when they're wrong, but I'm paying attention to see the context of how the error originated, so I'm aware that the grand majority of what's called out is a mix between accidental typos, something there wasn't context for at the time, via either not having transcripts or lacking knowledge of the series endgame, or disagreements in phrasing. Some of that is definitely legit to critique, but otherwise I let it slide outside of big failures like getting nouns and names wrong, or that stupid Jay-Z misromanization pet peeve of mine since, well, that's ubiquitous to almost all subtitles. The reason why I'm less tolerant with professionals messing up is we are paying for a professional product where we expect professional quality work, which should not possess the errors, dialogue alterations, and lack of research that may show up. This is why I appear hostile to the Shout Factory Super Sentai DVD sets, as they commit many mistakes I feel they should not, and fansubs of that material did not, which makes the unpaid fansubbers' work more faithful than the official product to a proper translation. That should not happen. Communication with set producer Brian Ward having revealed, like many 2000s-era fansub groups, no one is providing peer review necessary to fix them before they go to print. Speaking of Shout's more recent releases, Gigaman's translation is the worst one they've yet done, but paradoxically their Go-Go 5 release is the best translation of that series yet. That's mainly because both previous fan sub-releases for Go-Go 5 were awful for the same reason Shout's Gigaman subs were bad. The severity of creative liberties within them that are less present or harmful in the Go-Go 5 set's translation. The presence of creative liberties being the most significant factor by which I judge all translation work across the board. Such being where a translator unnecessarily changes the dialogue from what it was originally intended to be or should translate as, which alters how a series reads dramatically. This is not all changes to the media, for Japanese can be a difficult language to translate due to its differing structure, and sometimes there are cultural or social concepts such as puns, honorifics, idioms, and double entendre, which won't easily translate despite their importance to conveying the story, thus needs to be changed or simplified to be related to an audience properly, and must be carefully considered to express the intended meaning, to not even get into the costs of censorship. That kind of stuff is totally fine, and seen of a lot of older, competently done dubs, where to retain the essence of the characters and integrity of the story, dialogue ended up being changed but still represented the story told without harm, as it was done with the full awareness of the purpose such a change would play in the depiction of events as they had the full context of the given series before them. This showed the translators took the time to grasp the material's intended themes and direction before they would alter things and thus preserve them intact. When you see a good dub which rivals or outmatches the Japanese version and sub, that's usually what ends up happening in its development behind the scenes. No, the detrimental kind of creative liberties I'm referring to involves taking something which could have remained fully understandable to the audience without change, or made understandable with a simple notation providing context or minor modification, and then ignoring that entirely and rewriting it to whatever the hell the translator wants, especially if it intentionally removes context or awareness of other interpretations or a grander narrative purpose, which is harmful to the overall depiction of the series as it doesn't match what was intended. Also known as why every 4K media dub is awful. It is frustratingly commonplace for modern translators to pull this crap and, well, when you're aware of it, you don't let them sell you that crap. Especially when it has been shown that there are multiple ways to retain that original intent without significant alteration. Now, with fan subs doing this, the common defense for their creative liberties is they are translating the material as if it were a dub to make it more accessible, but fail to understand that they are not producing a dub, and it is sometimes necessary for a dub to change dialogue further due to the limitations of space and time a line may be delivered in, or in the complexity of what's conveyed, and those changes are despised if they do not reflect the character, the intentions of the material, or what was actually said. While I could spend time discussing dubbing as a whole, this aside is not meant to address dubbing practices, so let me forward you all to the YouTuber The Cartoon Cypher and his video about why anime dubs change scripts. It's very informative and cites several examples I would've if I were to do a list of decisions which poorly reflect blind localization. Particularly what happened with the Kobayashi Dragon Maid dub, as I really enjoyed that series in its sub form, but am among the camp who can't stand its dub due to the damage the creative liberties taken did in making something adorable and harmless come off as malignant due to the line changes altering how the relationships between the characters read to a harmful degree.
いや、なんか誤解してない？いいなんて。You cuckold! Hmm? You slutting glasses! Okay, pretty sure you're making a mistake. Don't slut shame this. Break up with this slut! Okay. Give her back!
And also his references to the recent trend of inserting pop culture, current event, politicking, and in-the-moment terminology, where it didn't exist before, being something else which can harm the depiction of a story by overriding the context of a series and add any greater nuances intended by the narrative, instead of trying to preserve it as good dubs strive for. But take all that controversy over bad dub-based localization choices, which have proof of the harmful divergence from the contrast between it and what is showcased in the subtitle, and then apply that all back to just making the subtitle for a show. A scenario where the dub would have no difference from the sub, not because the dub stayed accurate to the original script, but because the subtitle's authors have chosen to not stick to said script, but instead conform to a dub's alterations and enacting in conflict with the Japanese dialogue. Which is the exact thing I keep running into and consider more harmful than just the occasional screwed up line. That is not a problem subtitles or any translation should suffer, as if you're doing the job right, you are matching up as close as you can get while trying to preserve the idiosyncrasies which can and do inform the story. Thus, subtitles which take liberties and alter the dialogue unnecessarily in pursuit of making a dub-like sub or dub title to pander to the lowest denominator and disregard these things are providing a worse overall translation than ones which sometimes screw up a word or phrase or retain a non-translatable idiom. Cases in point to that being Ornak, making characters spout references to The Legend of Zelda when they weren't originally, and substituting the Power Rangers adaptation's terminology in the place of what the Sentai utilized. Yes, those are real examples of misconduct, and belong to groups promoted and praised as providing the best translations one could ask for, despite their presence showing they hold a fundamental misunderstanding of the process of translation and the material itself. You see why I don't really talk about this? I basically operate at odds with a hatedom that is an extension of the whole dubs versus subs conflict when you think about it. Accuracy versus accessibility. And while I prefer to use dubs where I can, I come down on the accuracy comes first side of the argument every time. As if you're intentionally making needless changes and lying about what's said in a show but not staying true to the material, then you're not doing your job of making a product accessible. But just to give an example of how stupid the politicking is, Kamen Rider Build's opening song, Be the One, initially had drastically different translations between TV Nihon Overtime and Gundam Corp subs for episodes 1 through 7 of the show. The caption scripts don't include song lyrics. Thus, they have to get that from an independent source that goes by ear until the official song release, which in the script originally supplied had an error. Due to the singer Beverly making use of several English phrases in the song, a homonym was accidentally placed in for one of the lines. I wa makanai, love doesn't lose, was heard and assumed to be I wanna get in or I wanna make it, which sounds very similar. Because of the song possessing many English phrases part of it and a slight slur present with that line, no one could tell there was anything wrong, which is understandable. People mishear song lyrics on a daily basis. All three groups made this error, and that's expected to happen from time to time. A corrected script for the song first circulated alongside episode 8, and TV Nihon was the first to utilize it. But immediately after they did so, the hatedom went on the attack. How dare they think that was the actual lyrics? How dare they be arrogant and make such a change? It was right before that. Because of course it couldn't be an innocent mistake that's the cause, right? Well, Overtime and Gundam will show them they're actually competent. When Overtime released their translation of Build Episode 9, they made the exact same correction. And on top of that, they also corrected several other mistakes they had been making, which then made their work no different than TVN's, with Gundam Corp making an even more liberal rewrite in turn that ignored the song's verses, which made their translation worse, and ignored all the other errors they made. But instantly, the narrative of the hatedom changed. How dare TV Nihon lie to everyone, which then made everyone else screw up? Yes, how dare they be the first to correct a mistake everyone unintentionally made as soon as they could, and with the other group's other errors accounted by them rushing out the sub, and making use of a more liberal and revisionist style to their work which skips required quality control. That is not an attack, just a fact part and parcel with the policies they make use of. Then, the official release of the song hit stores around episode 19, and this entire thing repeated itself. But what that official song release revealed? With exception to that one single line everybody got wrong due to a bad script, TV Nihon had been providing the correct translation for the song all along. This serves as a microcosm of the entire argument that repeats itself almost verbatim every year, and thus why I no longer dignify it, nor respect those that make it. As whoever seems to do so, in deriding an honest effort to stay true to the intentions of the series, and instead promoting and heralding those who make more severe and egregious alterations in the name of being accessible, just end up shouting, I find it fundamentally hypocritical by these factions not holding everyone equally as accountable for their errors, and I've repeatedly found those who drive this hate-dom do so to hide how bad their alterations are. And when that happens, that has led to the complete misunderstanding of entire series. And you can't tell me that doesn't happen. Gokaiger, Kyoryuger, Forz, and Gaim all have hate-doms largely predicated on perceptions born solely from the content included in revisionist interpretations of the series, not what was actually intended by them. Though, as I have been trying to impress, TV Nihon's original Blade release is far from modern standards. But all the errors are understandable ones given the circumstances of the time and the issues with this show in specific. And more recent re-releases they've done have fixed most of what they did legitimately screw up back in the day, and was legitimate to critique. But if you want to watch the show entirely fresh, the fan subgroup Excite Subs, who released a TVN alternative for Excite, are currently resubbing the show from scratch. While I don't agree with every translation choice they have made, nor do I any translator I use, they're not doing a bad job at it and avoiding creative liberties, nor slandering anyone else to promote their own work, so I can at the very least respect them. I cannot say that of many others that do this. And checking their work against both previous fan scrubs and TV Nihon's more recent redrafts of the series, it again shows that if you're doing the job right, then the only differences should be nothing but a variance between equally valid interpretations and phrasing that endeavor to stay true to the source material, making the one worse more dependent on how altered it might be. For these reviews, I ultimately go with those that commit the fewest liberties at the end of the day, as even if there's typos and interim errors, true understanding of a show's nuances will still shine through. That isn't as apparent where the entire reason a group fucked up and a show becomes despised is they rewrote what was originally done by the show's writing staff. And to bring it back to my originating point, the flubbed line screwing over translating it by ear, that's well known. Kenzaki is a meme because of them. It all called Ondul after Tsubaki's first botched line. Ondoru Ragita Ndeska, which should have been Honto ni Ragita Ndeska, which translates as, have you really betrayed us, or are you really a traitor, depending on how you phrase it. It is so infamous, it has been parodied elsewhere, like in Haruhi Suzumiya, got the show its cult following, and, well, to remove his screwed up lines would be to eviscerate Kenzaki's character. And I'm serious. Kenzaki's speak is pretty much the only unique trait we get out of him. The staff taking advantage of Tsubaki's flaw to actually give him something. Anything to make Blade stand out. As otherwise, he is a ridiculously bland, generic hero when you first look at him, and the series follows from that. To the point that in a fan mail answering session supplied by the indie tokusatsu production group Garage Hero, suit actor Seiji Takaiwa said that his performance here was the most difficult of his entire decades-long career. The reason being, and this is a direct translation of his statement, he has no character to work with. Ryuki's a goof, so I act clumsily in the suit. Faiz is somewhat of a delinquent, so I fight rough and tough. But Blade, he's just a salaryman. He works for board and fights monsters, but that's it. In the script, he just acts like a normal hero type who wants to protect people, but beyond that there's nothing there to help me convey that when I'm in the suit. And that's why Blade was the most difficult. And that is not an invalid critique. Kanzaki is as vanilla as you get. But that was the consequence of the ongoing fandom discourse. Get back to basics, stop mandating everyone be unlikable assholes, and get on with fighting the threats to humanity instead of fighting among yourselves for bad reasons. And that's why ignoring Kanzaki speak in one's translation is actually harmful to the series, too. While it may appear wrong, that oddity is half of the merit of the character, and reflective of a microcosm of this entry overall. They're trying to do the best job they can and tell an interesting story, but it's one that is so basic it's only really distinguished by its flaws. Remove the flaws and you don't even have that, which is why it's often put on the worst of list by fans. It's not really a notable show. Not horrid or insulting enough to one's sensibilities to draw hatred, but not inspiring, unique, or enjoyable enough to be loved. Though in a way, it can be seen as a series that embraced its flaws and bought into them to show the true merits of humanity throughout its storyline, which did accent the show. Most of you aren't buying that, are you? Let's just get started on Blade already.